On August 7, 2025, inside Turkey's presidential palace in Ankara, a set of signatures marked the end of a 60-year relationship and the birth of a new geopolitical chapter. This was no ordinary diplomatic event. It was the moment Senegal, long considered France's most dependable ally in Africa, officially aligned itself with Turkey. The shift was nothing short of historic. For decades, Senegal had been the cornerstone of France's West African strategy, hosting French military bases, using the CFA franc tied to Paris, and standing as a loyal voice for French interests on the continent. France had every reason to believe Senegal would never turn away. But that assumption collapsed when Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko traveled to Ankara to sign for sweeping agreements covering military financing, defense cooperation, joint media, ventures, and education. These deals weren't just symbolic, they represented a carefully designed strategy to replace France's presence in Senegal with a deep, long-term partnership with Turkey. The most significant was a military financial cooperation pact, signed by both nations' defense ministers, giving Ankara direct influence over Senegal's armed forces at the exact moment France is scaling back its regional military presence. The second agreement focused on joint media production, an area that may seem minor, but holds massive cultural power. Turkey plans to flood West African airwaves with television dramas and films, following the same soft power strategy that helped South Korea dominate global pop culture. The third deal opened a pathway for Senegalese students and researchers to integrate into Turkey's education system, joining a growing community of over 60,000 African students already there. This isn't just about education, it's about shaping the next generation of leaders who will carry Turkish ties into the future. The fourth agreement updated an existing defense protocol, formally naming Turkey as Senegal's primary security partner. The timing was masterful. Just days before, Senegal had unveiled an ambitious economic strategy to finance 90% of its $8.16 billion development plan domestically, signaling a break from reliance on Paris. Turkey positioned itself as the partner best equipped to support this new era of autonomy. From the moment Sonko's plane landed in Ankara, the visit was choreographed as a full display of respect. He was welcomed with state honors, a red carpet, and a personal greeting from President Erdogan at the presidential complex, a symbolic gesture of equality that resonated deeply with a leader known for challenging Western dominance. Behind closed doors, Erdogan's approach was the opposite of the West's usual tone. Instead of lecturing on governance or human rights, he praised Senegal's independent development model as bold and visionary, validating Sonko's core political principles. He referred to Sonko as his dear brother and a key African leader, pledging Turkey's full commitment to Senegal's long-term vision, Senegal 2050. Importantly, Turkey offered what France had never granted: real technology transfers and capacity-building initiatives to grow local industries, not just the sale of foreign goods. The military partnership was especially transformative. Turkey's support goes beyond selling equipment. It's about reshaping Senegal's defense strategy from a French-dependent model to a self-sustaining one. The deal includes training Senegalese officers in Turkish military academies, introducing Turkish doctrine, and creating a generation of officers who will see Ankara, not Paris, as their main strategic partner. The timing exploited a major security vacuum in the Sahel created by France's withdrawal from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Into that gap stepped Turkey, offering advanced, battle-proven weapons such as drones at a fraction of Western prices, without the political strings that often come with US or French deals. Erdogan's messaging during the visit was equally calculated. He called Africa the star of our century and praised its energy and youth, a stark contrast to Europe's often paternalistic view of the continent. Without naming names, he condemned the arrogance of former colonial powers, clearly pointing at France while positioning Turkey as a respectful, equal partner. He also highlighted shared political values, including Senegal's solidarity with Palestine, and backed up his words by pointing to Turkish-funded infrastructure Senegalese citizens see every day, such as the modern international airport and the 50,000-seat Abdoulaye Wade Stadium. What happened in Ankara was more than a diplomatic success, it was a strategic turning point. Turkey didn't just win a friend. It may have triggered the beginning of the end for France's influence in West Africa. Erdogan's approach in Ankara wasn't just about selling promises, he presented tangible results. This is the formula for building 21st-century alliances. Treat leaders as equals, recognize their national ambitions, connect through shared values, and deliver real projects that change lives. France, after decades of taking its African partners for granted, seems to have forgotten this basic principle. The Senegal-Turkey partnership goes far beyond diplomacy and defense. It is a calculated strike against French financial dominance in West Africa, and the strategy behind it is remarkably precise. Just before the agreements were signed, Senegal's government unveiled its boldest economic policy since independence, funding 90% of its $8.16 billion national development plan using domestic resources. This means renegotiating old mining contracts, closing loopholes that allow tax evasion, and rejecting the dependency cycle of French-backed loans and IMF bailouts. It was a declaration of true economic sovereignty. Turkey's timing was flawless. President Erdogan immediately praised Senegal's self-financing model and pledged full Turkish support to bring this vision to life. This wasn't empty praise. Turkish export-import banks and development agencies are now positioned to fill the gap France once occupied. Turkey's offer is fundamentally different from the French model. For decades, French companies resisted real technology transfers and focused on resource extraction, often bringing in their own staff rather than developing local skills. In contrast, Turkish firms invest in building roads, training local engineers, and boosting industrial capacity. The potential impact is enormous. Senegal is the most stable economy in the CFA franc zone, a currency system backed by France that gives Paris enormous influence. If Senegal can chart an independent path with Turkey's backing, it could inspire the other 13 member nations to follow. The Senegal-Turkey alliance cannot be viewed in isolation. It could be the spark that ignites sweeping change across Francophone Africa, and every regional leader is paying attention. For decades, Senegal was held up as France's model African partner, stable, loyal, and integrated into French systems. If Ankara can win over France's most prized ally, the message to other capitals is clear. There is now an alternative. From Ivory Coast to Cameroon, leaders are asking themselves if Turkey can give Senegal a respectful, mutually beneficial partnership. What might it offer us? This demonstration effect is central to Turkey's strategy. Erdogan is already planning visits to Ethiopia and Somalia. Turkish drones now operate in 13 African countries, and Turkish Airlines connects Istanbul to 60 cities across the continent. As the economic anchor of West Africa's monetary union, Senegal's decisions inevitably influence its neighbors. France, meanwhile, is scrambling to rely on cultural diplomacy after its military presence was rolled back. But Turkey is moving faster, building cultural centers, business councils, and educational networks that create long-lasting influence. What we are witnessing could be the beginning of the end. For Francafrique, the century-old system of French dominance in Africa. For generations, Paris treated West Africa as its private reserve, extracting resources, controlling its currency, and keeping the right to intervene militarily to protect its interests. This system allowed France to maintain influence far beyond its size on the world stage. But Turkey has just revealed its fragility by presenting a credible alternative in defense, economics, and diplomacy, proving that African nations no longer have to accept subordinate roles with their former colonizers. The choice is now clear: continued dependence on an outdated, paternalistic power or partnership with a rising one that treats Africa as an equal. The timing couldn't be worse for France. President Macron is already struggling with military setbacks in the Sahel and economic challenges at home. Losing Senegal, the bedrock of French influence in Africa, could mark the collapse of its continental dominance for Turkey. This moment represents the peak of a strategy it has been developing for over 2 decades, establishing a sphere of influence that secures its economic and strategic future. But for Africa, It is something far greater, the empowerment to choose partners on its own terms and negotiate from a position of strength. The events in Ankara are not just about Turkey and Senegal. They signal the dawn of a new era where Africa is no longer a prize to be claimed, but a force in its own right.